Hmm.
I would just say to practice having that open peripheral visual space and then allowing the visual field to have that sort of shallow depth of field where it starts to come closer in a way because it starts to give you some of that sense of here-ness where um that extra overlay that we normally just take for granted that kind of pushes things further away, it starts to pull in a little bit. And these are all kind of ways to play with that to start to break that down. I have another one which I'm curious. I'm sitting outside and it seems like I don't know if you will need a longer um room to do this in or a longer area to do this, but we can try this. So
Okay.
the assumption that we have, like right now, I'm outside looking across a yard at the neighbor's house, and the assumption that we have, if you think of like if you've ever shown a spotlight or a flashlight, a
Mhm.
strong flashlight outside on something, or think of like in a concert when you have like a big projected light coming off the stage and then it scrolls across the audience and it goes up the back wall. You can see if the light was, if this was the ground and the light was scanning here, you could see kind of the angle as though the light is going there, and then if there's a wall, you can see it kind of going up the wall, right? You can kind of
Right.
picture how it is. If you look at uh find like wherever is the furthest away from you again in the room.
Hang on. Well, I'm gonna actually open up the blinds here. So.
Oh, perfect. All right. So what I would like is if you would look straight down at the ground and
Yeah.
then very slowly track your eyes up, up along the ground, and in your case, probably up the wall, and then out the window to the furthest spot, and see if sort of mentally there is this kind of idea as though your gaze is actually on the ground, getting further and further away, going up the wall, going outside, across the tree, up into the sky, as though it's like that spotlight from a flashlight. Like it's like really tracking the ground at a distance and getting further and further away, right? Do you see what I'm?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's our normal experience is to feel like as we're tracking around, our gaze is like out there someplace, kind of almost like feeling the surfaces with our view, right? But what is actually happening right now? If you do it again, if you bring your eyes down to the ground and very slowly lift them up across still follow the path along the ground, up the wall, out the window. But as you're doing it, notice what is actually happening. Your head is going straight up. Your eyes are not moving out and further and further and further away. Your eyes are simply just looking straight up. All that
Right.
we're doing is visualizing a field, which is a perfectly unified, flat visual image. And very much like a screen, like if we were in a IMAX movie screen or a movie theater with a giant screen in front and around us, or if we're wearing virtual reality glasses and we're kind of moving our eyes inside of the glasses, the whole unified display is there. And simply all we're doing is moving our eyes up to bring in more and more of this to kind of change the visual display, right? Like we're changing the contents of the visual field. But the eyes are only moving directly up. They're moving directly to the left, to the right, up, down. We're not moving out. We're not moving across. We're not we're not bringing in any sense of depth. We're simply um, scanning in an absolutely flat vertical plane up and down and bringing in different amounts of information. The the feeling, so it's a combination of felt sensations in the body, as
Hmm.
well as I think there's a lot of what actually helps to create that sense of space is from the auditory field, where we're hearing the room reverberations and that sort of thing. That is playing a lot into the calculations. The feelings of spaciousness around the boundaries of the body. And you can feel right now, if you have something like in front of you, like close by, like you can probably feel if there's like a desk or something that's nearby
Hmm.
versus if you have more space around you to the other side.
Right.
Um, those things are playing into it. Um, the physical sensation of like the density of the body here versus this apparent lack of density out there.
Right.
The perspective where we're seeing a house or a tree far away is really small, and then the stuff that's up closer is bigger. All of those calculations are being played subconsciously to put together a world that feels three-dimensional and at a distance and in that way. And it's not to say that there isn't truth to that, because of course, if I was going to stand up and run across the yard to the neighbor's house, I would actually have to traverse that amount of space. I would
Right.
actually have to go across there. I literally cannot reach out and touch that house from here. Right? Like it's
Hmm.
none of this is to say that space doesn't actually exist. The whole reason why we are doing this is because there is in that view of that space out there at least two falsehoods. One is the reification of the me, the witness, the self, something here, which is separate from that which is out there.
Hmm.
And when you can experience that thing that is not here, that sense of distance will often just collapse spontaneously on its own. Not to say that it doesn't really exist, but in the temporary experience that goes along with it, there seems to be a conjunction of actually, I suspect that, materialistically, I suspect that the brain has certain regions which are creating the sense of space, which are also involved with our feeling of that feeling of witnessing and self. And when the two go offline, they kind of go offline together. And I suspect what we're actually doing by doing the visual exercises is to essentially reverse engineer our way into that feeling of lack of self or that lack of witness. So that if you can
Huh.
get to that point where that collapses, it brings with it, it might bring with it that sense of the self here also collapses with it. And so I think this is actually probably what's happening is a reverse engineering of getting there. Because historically, if you look at like, old Buddhist texts and stuff, they never really talked about doing visual exercises like that to collapse the sense of space. But sometimes you would hear people say things about, that in more poetic ways, I guess, about that sense of distance collapsing, everything is right here, all of that. I think it's a an experience that people can have when certain aspects of identification fall away, and we're basically getting at it from the other side. Um, that's why I also don't think it's completely necessary for people to have two-dimensional vision and things like that, because it's an experience which is available on the awakening spectrum, but
Hmm.
it's really more important to recognize that sense of a separate witnesser self, something here, which is separate from that which is out there. And the other part that's kind of the other fraudulent view in that sense of space and distance is that we're combining sensory fields in a way that
Hmm.
create a world, but which are not really the way that we experience them. You
Hmm.
are right now discretely feeling the sensations in the body as sensations in the body or
Right.
sensations in space. You are discretely seeing a visual field, which is the room, the window, whatever's outside the window or appearing in the window. All of that is the visual field. But there's this added combination that's happening where it's putting the felt sense with the visual field and with the auditory field and the
Hmm.
gustatory and the olfactory senses. And all of that is being compiled into a world that does not actually exist for you the way that you think it does, or the way that it appears right this moment. So we're breaking it down into the actual visual field has nothing to do in this regard with that physical sense. The actual physical field, visual field, is something which appears in a way unique from the sounds which we are associating with it. You know, like right now, and this is kind of a weird one because you can't actually hear any of this, but like there are all these dead leaves that are down here with all these plants and things. And as the wind goes through, I can hear the rustling of these leaves and the rustling of the branches and the stems and the leaves that are on the plants. And all of this is happening together. And there is a compiling of those sensory data into, well, of course, it's those leaves which are rustling and making the sound. And it's those plants that are creating the sound. And I can tell that it's not happening right here. It must be happening out there at 2 feet away and at 6 feet away. And that tractor is, you know, at least 30 feet away. All of that is happening based on these calculations that are happening in the mind. What we're doing is breaking them down at first to recognizing that actually all you're doing is seeing visual color and shape in motion. You are hearing sounds, crunch, 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 all of these sounds, which are in themselves completely distinct from any visual appearance. It's distinct from the feeling of wind on the skin, that feeling of movement on the skin, or that rushing of the wind past the ears. Those are just sounds and just sensations. And we start out by breaking them all apart into their constituent components and recognizing that aggregation of all of them into a world is something which is our own manifestation and our creation. And that's why the more attention we pay to it, that starts to break down. And it can start to be kind of weird because all of a sudden we realize the sound is not happening out in the leaves themselves. The sound is happening right here, like within, you know, closer than the ears. The visual field is not happening out there. That visual field is actually happening in here.
Right.
There is nothing outside of this experience, right? We can get there cognitively by recognizing that the brain is just taking in all of these electrical signals from through the eyes and the ears and everything. And all of that is being fabricated and compiled in the brain. So our actual experience of all of this is happening in the very same space as all of our internal thoughts and internal monologue and all that. It's
Right.
all here. That's it. We are never seeing an actual outside external world. We are just seeing our representation of it. And that's one way of sort of cognitively getting ourselves into that space where we recognize that what we're seeing out there isn't really out there to begin with. But ultimately, we have to go beyond that just cognitive understanding to where we can really experience it as it is simply showing up. And the more we get out there or in here, but the more we get with just the sensations as they're appearing and notice that comparison between what I take to be me in here, or a witnesser, or a hearer, or a seer, or a smeller in here, versus the actual world that smells like gas fumes and flowers and dry leaves and all of that. All of that is happening in this same space. But notice each of those sensations independently. And eventually it might get to the point where all of those different, distinct sensation fields might actually start to break down, and you might start to notice that they're all actually made of the same basic, you know, indescribable substance, that they actually break down too, and that there is no such thing as just the visual field or the physical sense field or the auditory field, that what they're made of starts to actually dissolve. But that's yet another way of kind of experiencing it once we have started to break down more and more the the seeming appearance of the separation between something here versus something there.